This is Land of Havilah, 1 Samuel 28. David, his two wives, his men, and their families are still living in Philistine country in the village of Ziklag, thanks to permission from Philistine king Achish. But now Achish wants something from David. Verse 1. In those days the Philistines gathered their armies together for warfare to fight with Israel. Achish said to David, "Know assuredly that you will go out with me in the army, you and your men." David said to Achish, "Therefore you will know what your servant can do." Achish said to David, "Therefore I will make you my bodyguard forever." Comment: The Philistines are preparing to make war on Israel, and Achish wants David and his men to be his personal protective force, his personal bodyguard. This is a tremendous conflict of interest for David. On the one hand, he is dependent on Achish to protect him from Saul, and therefore he owes Achish a certain loyalty. But on the other hand, if the army of Israel gets close enough to Achish to pose a threat, David certainly doesn't want to be in the position to kill any Israelites. And even though Saul has been trying to kill David, David's still extremely faithful to Saul. But God was with David and put just the right answer in his mouth. He said, "Therefore you will know what your servant can do." It sounded very cooperative, that answer, as in, I'm just the man for the job, but it was really a non-committal, non-answer sort of answer, like, we'll see about it. Therefore you will know what your servant can do. It was a brilliant non-response of a response. Verse 3. Now Samuel was dead, and all Israel had mourned for him and buried him in Ramah, even in his own city. Comment: Samuel died in chapter 25, and that was just a reminder. Still in verse 3. Saul had sent away those who had familiar spirits and the wizards out of the land. Comment: This is something Saul did correctly. He's been enforcing the law of Moses with regard to sorcery and the like. According to the law, there should be no calling on the spirit world other than calling on Yahweh. The punishment for violation is death, Deuteronomy 18:10 and Leviticus 20:27. This will all be important coming up. Verse 4. The Philistines gathered themselves together and came and encamped in Shunem, and Saul gathered all Israel together, and they encamped in Gilboa. Comment: The Philistine army has come up to Israel and encamped in the Jezreel Valley, and Saul has responded by bringing his own army within a few miles. Verse 5. When Saul saw the army of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. When Saul inquired of Yahweh, Yahweh didn't answer him by dreams, by Urim, or by the prophets. Comment: Saul's desperate. He wants to hear from Yahweh, but Yahweh won't answer. Verse 7. Then Saul said to his servants, "Seek for me a woman who has a familiar spirit, that I may go to her and inquire of her." Comment: The literal Hebrew translation is, "Find me a woman with a ritual pit." A ritual pit is for the purpose of calling up spirits. It's also been translated woman who is a medium, in other words, someone who can serve as a go-between in communicating with the spirit world. Still in verse 7. His servant said to him, "Behold, there is a woman who has a familiar spirit at Endor." Comment: Endor is a nearby town. She's the medium of Endor. Verse 8. Saul disguised himself and put on other clothing, and went, he and 2 men with him, and they came to the woman by night. Then he said, "Please consult for me by the familiar spirit, and bring me up whomever I shall name to you." Comment: This has also been translated, "Use your ritual pit to conjure up for me the one I tell you." NET Bible. Saul's disguising himself from the woman, and he has a particular spirit in mind with whom he wants to talk. Verse 9. The woman said to him, "Behold, you know what Saul has done, how he has cut off those who have familiar spirits and the wizards out of the land. Why then do you lay a snare for my life to cause me to die?" Comment: Before she admits to being a medium, she wants to make sure she can rely on these 3 men to keep quiet. Verse 10. Saul swore to her by Yahweh, saying, "As Yahweh lives, no punishment will happen to you for this thing." Then the woman said, "Whom shall I bring up to you?" He said, "Bring Samuel up for me." When the woman saw Samuel, she cried with a loud voice, and the woman spoke to Saul, saying, "Why have you deceived me? For you are Saul." Comment: Somehow, we don't know how, when the woman saw Samuel, she also realized that her customer was Saul. The fact that she saw Samuel and suddenly recognized Saul is pregnant with all sorts of implications. In the first place, we shouldn't automatically write off mediums, sorcerers, magicians, necromancers, diviners, and the like as nothing but pure quacks or sources of innocent fun. The law of Moses treated it very seriously. The New Testament treats it seriously as well. Acts 16:16 speaks of a girl with an unholy spirit of divination. Secondly, we should stay away from all that sort of business. Since it's not from God, it's chilling to think what we might be messing with if we get involved with it. Yahweh called that sort of thing an abomination, Deuteronomy 18:9. And Yahweh asks a very logical question in Isaiah 8:19. In talking about consulting mediums and wizards and the dead, he says, quote, "Shouldn't a people consult with their God?" End quote. The obvious answer is that yes, we should consult with God rather than with mediums or the dead. And there's another point here. Samuel died, but his spirit's definitely alive and well. This is the strongest confirmation of the afterlife yet in the Old Testament. Verse 13. The king said to her, "Don't be afraid. What do you see?" The woman said to Saul, "I see a god coming up out of the earth." Comment, she says she sees a god, which has also been translated spirit. Verse 12 already told us she was seeing Samuel. Verse 14. He said to her, "What does he look like?" She said, "An old man comes up. He's covered with a robe." Saul perceived that it was Samuel, and he bowed with his face to the ground and showed respect. Samuel said to Saul, "Why have you disturbed me to bring me up?" Comment, the spirit of Samuel is speaking. He's definitely alive and well, but disturbed to be brought up. Still in verse 15. Saul answered, "I am very distressed, for the Philistines make war against me, and God has departed from me and answers me no more, by prophets or by dreams. Therefore I have called you, that you may make known to me what I shall do." Samuel said, "Why then do you ask me, since Yahweh has departed from you and has become your adversary?" Comment, Samuel says, "Why do you ask me? If Yahweh's against you, there's certainly nothing I can do to help you." "Who can help you if Yahweh's against you?" Samuel goes on, verse 17. "Yahweh has done to you as he spoke by me. Yahweh has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor, even to David, because you didn't obey Yahweh's voice and didn't execute his fierce wrath on Amalek. Therefore Yahweh has done this thing to you today." Comment, we read about the time that Saul grabbed onto Samuel's robe and it tore, and Samuel said, "Just like that, God's going to tear the kingdom away from you." Now Samuel's telling Saul, "I told you all this before," but coming up he's going to tell Saul something new. Verse 19. "Moreover, Yahweh will deliver Israel also with you into the hand of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. Yahweh will deliver the army of Israel also into the hand of the Philistines." Comment, Samuel says, "Tomorrow you and your sons will be with me." Which brings up the question, where's that? What type of place is it? This is quite the can of worms, because the Bible only gives us hints here and there about the afterlife. And in no place is there a single passage that ties all those comments together. There's mention of Sheol, the bosom of Abraham, of being gathered to one's fathers or gathered to one's people, mentions of Hades, heaven, hell, and the lake of fire, eternal punishment and eternal life. But there's no place we can go to give us a cohesive understanding of those places, or the differences in them, or what will happen in those places when. But suffice it to say now, to say what Samuel just said, tomorrow Saul and his sons will be with Samuel. There is life after death. But right now, Saul's not thinking about that. He's just thinking about what Samuel said, what's going to happen on earth tomorrow when he dies in battle. Verse 20. Then Saul fell immediately his full length on the earth, and was terrified because of Samuel's words. There was no strength in him, for he had eaten no bread all day long or all night long. The woman came to Saul and saw that he was very troubled, and said to him, "Behold, your servant has listened to your voice, and I have put my life in my hand, and have listened to your words which you spoke to me. Now therefore please listen also to the voice of your servant, and let me set a morsel of bread before you. Eat, that you may have strength when you go on your way." Comment, the medium said, "I risked my life for you. Now listen to me and have something to eat." Verse 23. But he refused and said, "I will not eat." But his servants together with the woman constrained him, and he listened to their voice. So he arose from the earth and sat on the bed. The woman had a fattened calf in the house. She hurried and killed it, and she took flour and kneaded it and baked unleavened bread of it. She brought it before Saul and before his servants, and they ate. Then they rose up and went away that night. Comment, a fattened calf was the heartiest and most satisfying thing around, but What could it do to satisfy a man from whom God has departed? 1 Samuel 29 is next at landofhavilah.net, 1 Samuel 29. This is the map of 1 Samuel 28. The Philistine army camped at Shunem. This is modern Shunem. Saul camped his army at Gilboa. This is Mount Gilboa. Saul consulted the medium at Endor. This is modern Endor. 1 Samuel 29 is next.